nation. Few societies anywhere on earth have secured this opportunity to vote themselves into independence. This is an opportunity peacefully at the ballot box in a process which has been agreed and consented. It's an opportunity which may not come our way again. So when we post that ballot in the next few days, or we go into the polling station, we'll be taking the future of our country into our hands. We'll have opportunities as an independent country and the means of taking advantage of them. We'll have challenges as an independent country, and we've got to rise to these challenges to solve them. In contrast, all of the No campaign has nothing, absolutely nothing positive to say about the future of this country. In reality, there is only one thing we can guarantee, and this is what a yes vote can guarantee. At each and every election in an independent Scotland, we will get the government that we vote for. The choices that the people of Scotland make will be reflected in policy, and that means that policies and the position of Scotland will be placed in Scottish hands. This referendum is not about me or Alistair or the political parties or the newspapers or anybody. This referendum is about the future of Scotland, and the future of Scotland should be in the hands of the people of Scotland. It's about believing that we can govern ourselves better than anyone else can. We don't need to rise and be a nation. We only have to vote to believe in ourselves. This is our time, our moment. Let's seize it with both hands.
I'm the lead volunteer in the Scottish Borders for Yes Scotland. We've had a number of events across the, it feels like years. I think it's something like 18 months. We've had 10 events just in Tweeddale. This is the penultimate one, because David is organising one in Walkerburn. And what we aim to do with all the different events is give people an opportunity to hear perspectives on independence and what it could mean for us. And also to ask questions. Everyone is entitled to ask questions for what we all know is the biggest vote we will ever cast in our life. Tonight we put together a panel which is going to give you some very different pieces of information and different perspectives on the debate. We have 3 speakers, after which we will open it out to questions. So I will ask you just if you have any questions and you don't mind, just to save them until after the 3 speakers have spoken. Some logistics, there are some toilets just out here, fire exit here and here, and any questions or any problems if you want to just speak to me. First up, Ivan McKee. I feel like I know Ivan particularly well now, not just because of watching his YouTube video a few times, posting it on Facebook countless times, but he's also been brilliant at coming in and doing events for us in different areas in West Linton and in Peebles. Ivan is a successful independent businessman himself from Glasgow, and he's done the numbers on the business of independence, which for most people is their initial concern, an initial starting point when they look at independence. Ivan will take you through the numbers and give you an opportunity to ask questions. Hi, Scott. Ask questions about them, because sometimes they can be a little bit confusing when both sides say things that seem not to go together. So without further ado, I'll hand you on to Ivan McKee.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming out on another lovely night in the Borders. I'll keep this to about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have plenty of time later if anybody wants to go into any of the details. And apologies if you've seen some of this before, but it's for the benefit of those that haven't. There's, as Callum mentioned, this stuff's on YouTube, so don't feel you need to take notice of anything. There's this and a lot more on YouTube. Go into a lot more detail, which is great to watch yourself, but even better to send on to people. And the view count on some of this stuff's been clicking up at over 1,000 a day in the last few days, so folk are obviously watching it to make their decisions before the big event. First thing I'm going to talk about is my journey to Yes, why I'm here. As Callum mentioned, in business, I've been in manufacturing for 30 years, been running my own businesses for about 9 or 10 years now. I've got my own consultancy business that does work internationally, and at the moment a couple of manufacturing businesses, bases in Scotland, England and Eastern Europe. When the referendum came up a couple of years ago as a live issue, I thought it made sense to try and understand a bit more about it. So I went and looked at it as if it was a business deal. Scotland as a PLC was a business. Is it something you'd want to invest in or something you'd want to steer well clear of? I went and dug up the numbers. You can download them. People say there's not enough information. But the reality is that this will be the most well-informed country in the history of the planet that ever became independent. You spent every waking hour from now till 18th of September, and there's 360 of them left, doing nothing but reading reports and watching YouTube videos. You wouldn't get through a fraction of it. So the information's all there. Ignored all the political spin, looked at the numbers as if it was a business deal. What I found surprised me, because perhaps like many people, I've been led to believe over the years that Scotland was too poor, couldn't afford this, was subsidised, etc., etc. And the reality is it's quite the opposite. And I'll show you some of the data points on that as we go through this. First point to note is this is a rich country. Scotland generates more tax per person than the UK average, which surprised me, but the data's all there. So the great thing about the data is nobody disputes it. They all kind of try and spin it, but nobody disputes the basic raw numbers. These are the numbers for the last 5 years. Scotland's average tax take per person compared to the UK. Over those 5 years, Scotland generated about £10,000 per person, the UK 8,800. This includes all tax, so it's everything: income tax, national insurance, VAT, corporation tax, road tax, whatever, all added together, divided by the population. So we do generate more tax than the UK average, no doubt about that. And on with last year or the last few years, if you look back over the last 33 years because that's when they started collecting data, the Tory government, as then the Scottish Secretary of State, decided we'd collect some data to prove how Scotland was subsidised, and of course it's shown the opposite ever since. The dark line, the higher line is Scotland's tax take per person, the lower line is the UK average per person. Every year it's more in Scotland. Some years it's a bit more, other years it's an embarrassing amount more. In actual fact, if you look at the data and you look at the last 5 years, for example, if Scotland gets more spent on it per person as well, and there's reasons for that. There's things here that are free, that aren't free down south, and there are things here that are in public ownership that have been privatised down south. But the amount of extra tax we generate more than pays for the extra spending per head that we incur. In actual fact, over the last 5 years, if Scotland had the same percentage of UK spending as we generated in UK taxes, we would have been £8.5 billion better off over those 5 years. And the one thing I think is worth mentioning, the no campaign talk about but you get more spent on Scotland, and that of course is true as I mentioned, but the question is who really thinks voters in the rest of the UK are going to allow Scotland to continue to get more spent on it in the event of a no vote? In fact, there was a poll on this last week, and only 12% of voters in the rest of the UK thought Scotland should continue to get more spent on it per head after a no vote. So despite the fact that we're more than pay our way, there are moves afoot to reduce Scotland's public spending. Another way to look at the wealth of the country is what they call GDP, gross domestic product. This is how they measure internationally which countries are the wealthiest. Scotland's GDP per person more than the UK, again going back through history, 11% last year, 18% the year before, average about 15% higher. That makes Scotland the 14th richest country in the world based on last year's data. We're kind of dropping in out the top 10, depending on how we're doing and everyone else is doing, but we're always several points above the UK, who are at number 18 last year. An interesting point is if you look at the list of the top 12 countries there in the world in terms of GDP per person, and the striking thing with that list, of course, is who those countries are. They are countries very like Scotland, in terms of size and location, with the exception, of course, that they don't have anything like, most of them don't have anything like the same natural resources and opportunity that Scotland has. So the question always is, that's the gap between where we should be and where we are. We should, no reason why we shouldn't be richer than most of those comparable countries in North and West Europe of about 5 to 10 million people, given our vast natural resources. The countries on there that aren't in that category, the US, Australia, Canada, etc., the thing they've got in common, of course, is they used to be ruled from London, and you don't see them queuing up to get back under Westminster control anytime soon, despite what Obama might say. Don't take my word for it. Standard & Poor's report from earlier this year, impressed by the richness and diversity of Scotland's economy, even excluding oil. They said that Scotland had qualified their highest economic assessment. The interesting thing about the oil revenues is even when you exclude those from Scotland's accounts completely, we still have a GDP that's the same as the UK average. Oil is very much the bonus. It's what we want to do with the second half of the oil bonanza. We want to invest it for the future of Scotland, or allow Westminster to squander it like they did the first half. Okay, so you're all asking yourself, as I was, if the numbers say that we're a rich country, why does it not look like it? Two maps to maybe try and address this. The first one is GDP per person broken down by parts of the UK. And as you'd expect, there's parts in the southeast of England along the M4 corridor, the City of London, one or two other points in the rest of the UK, northeast of Scotland, and to some extent across the Central Belt. That is where the wealth is generated across the UK. And that reflects the numbers we've seen in terms of GDP per person being higher in Scotland on average. That's where the wealth ends up. That's a chart of the richest households in the UK measured by the UK Office of National Statistics. They take a number which is just under £1 million. A household that's got more than that in assets means value of your house, your car, your stocks and shares, your pension, your job, whatever, all added together. If you've got more than that, you're counted as a wealthy household in the UK ONS terms. And the thing, of course, is the higher north you go, the less of those households there are, the darker colour, the more households there are in that category. South of England, it's 13%, more than 13%. Less as you go further north in Scotland, it's less than 7%. So if you jump back to that one, where the darker colour is generating the most wealth, to that one where the darker colour is where the wealth ends up, it shows you why it answers the paradox of why if Scotland on paper is generating the wealth, why does it not look like a rich country in many regards. So to summarise that part of it, if they tell us we're too poor, aye right, it's just absolutely not the case. The question then is, why do you get folk coming on the telly every night telling us we can't afford this, we can't afford that? And there was another example last night with Dougie Alexander on telling us we couldn't afford anything and the oil was going to run out next week, etc. The sad truth is it's vested interest to a large extent. The people asking about employment prospects in an independent Scotland, how many jobs will we lose? I say, well, we'll lose 59. What do you mean? What's the MPs of Scotland sends to Westminster? And there's a lot of them getting worried now because they're going to get a job in a year or two. So if you want to go up the greasy pole in political party, get a safe seat for life, House of Lords after that if you play your cards right, and then this independence malarkey comes along and it's all threatened, you can understand why they're keen to try and head it off at the pass. Nice wee quote, it's hard to get somebody to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. I'm going to touch on scare stories now, which is the main thrust of what we've had thrown at us. I could talk all night about these. I'll limit myself to 2 or 3. There'll be time in the Q&A to go into anything in any more detail you want to talk about. This is a quote from the Daily Express, February 1979, so a few weeks before the 1979 referendum on devolution I can just about remember it. Some of you will remember it like it was yesterday, and others will be saying, what is this old man talking about? It's the same square stories then, and this would be funny if it wasn't so sad. The Daily Express threatening that if we dared to vote yes for a Scottish Assembly, we'd lose all the heart of Scottish industry. The reality, of course, is we didn't get the Assembly, and every one of those sites was shut down through the course of the 80s under Thatcherism. We've got examples from 1990s when we were voting to set up the Scottish Parliament. Standard Life and Scottish Widows both said they would leave if we voted yes for devolution. We've got a Scottish Parliament, and guess what, we're still here. Learn from history. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Third time of asking. Let's. I don't think we're going to be fooled this time. Pensions. This is important because the demographic that's still most heavily no. I think in the last poll, every demographic pretty much moved to yes, apart from the over 60s, over 65s, in fact. And the No campaign's been pushing this remorselessly about we can't afford the pension. Headlines from the Daily Telegraph at the end of last year: only Mexicans have a worse state pension than the British. OECD survey of 40 countries, industrialised countries, comparing the state pension to cost of living in the country. Britain came in at number 39, Mexico's number 40, and of course there's many countries in Europe that have a much better state pension than Britain. So first point is it's a bit of a disgrace to see you're going to lose this wonderful British state pension if you dare to vote for independence. Secondly, pensions are more affordable in Scotland. That's the data last 5 years. Social protection, which is pensions plus welfare as a percentage of Scotland's spend, and the UK's as a percentage of Scotland's GDP, and the UK's percentage of tax take, in fact, on revenue. So it's a lower percentage of our revenue, and it's a lower percentage of our GDP than the UK average. So if Scotland can't afford pensions, the UK absolutely can't afford pensions. And that's even before you get to the fact that the UK government and the DWP have both written letters stating that they remain responsible for pensions after a yes vote anyway, because if you've paid into your pension, you're due to get a payout from the British government, no matter whether you're living in Spain, France, the UK or Scotland. And they put that in writing, so the whole thing is on 3 counts, complete nonsense. And the next one is about borrowing costs, which is something that came up. We keep throwing this out, it costs more to borrow money in an independent Scotland. So we went and said, is that true? We went and dug up some data to see, because the great thing about the internet now is you can go and Google stuff and find answers fairly quickly. And this is me looked a few weeks ago, this was from Bloomberg Money Markets, 10-year government bond yields, how much government's paid to borrow money. Because the No campaign's pushing this line that in a smaller country, of course it costs you more to borrow money. Well, guess what? It doesn't cost Switzerland or Denmark or Austria or Finland or the Netherlands or the Czech Republic or Sweden or Belgium, and when any of those small or even any of those small European countries more to cost borrow money than the UK, actually costs them less to borrow money in the UK. In fact, the only countries that are more to borrow than the UK are Spain, Italy, Portugal, Greece. Even Ireland can now borrow cheaper than the UK can, because what they're interested in is the strength of your economy, what kind of assets you've got, what your deficit and your debt to GDP ratios are like, and all those count. Scotland's in a better place than the UK. I'm going to finish up. I've talked about the fact that we can afford this, talked about the fact that all we're getting from the other side of the scare stories. This is a bit more about the opportunities, and it's by way of a wee story that kind of highlights where we sit as a country in terms of the opportunity that's before us. And it's a story about the Prime Minister of Norway that goes for a wee walk along the fjord one day, as you do, and he stumbles across the magic lamp and he picks it up and gives it a rub, and the genie pops out, and the genie says to the Prime Minister of Norway, I'll give you some wishes to make Norway a better place. And the Prime Minister says, that's hard. We're just about the richest country in the world. They measure these things and tell us we're one of the happiest countries in the world. Everybody's got a good job, very little poverty to speak of. People have got money and leisure time to enjoy it. It's hard to think of something that would make us a better country. And the genie says, well, you'll need to think of something. And the Prime Minister says, well, I can think of a few things. On you go. He said, well, we've got a good economy in Norway, we've got our oil industry, we've got fisheries, but we've not got much else. It'd be good to have some other industries we could rely on to generate income for us. he said, we've got this national drink called Aquavit. We love it, but nobody else has ever heard of it. It'd be great if that was a global brand and everybody from Singapore to Chicago would pay stupid money to take it off our hands. And we couldn't make enough of this stuff if we were the only people that were allowed to make it. That would be a nice wee earner now and into the future. So, yeah, we can do that for you. He said we've got a beautiful country here in Norway, but it's really big and the weather's awful in the winter. We get snow ploughs out 3 months of the year, it's minus 35, but snow up to you're just getting to work in the morning, it's hard work, it's full of mountains, long way top to bottom, it's a fortune to put infrastructure in. It'd be great with the same natural resources and the same population in a country a quarter the size with nice mellow winters, so we didn't have to worry about keeping the place warm when it gets down to minus 35. He said, yeah, we can do that for you. So we've got a problem with our language. We speak Norwegian, which is a bit of a nuisance because nobody else speaks it. We want to talk to anybody else, go on holiday, do business with anybody. We've got to learn another language. It would be great if you made Norwegian the world business language. So we'd offer playing in Tokyo or Brazil, we just speak in Norwegian and everybody understands what we're saying and make life a lot easier to get things done. He said, yeah, we can do that for you. He said, we've got a problem with export from Norway because to get to our main markets, we've got to go through 2 other countries to get to where our main markets are in Europe. If you could just bolt a landmass of 60 million people on a southern border, all speak Norwegian, of course, we want to buy a drink and our fisheries and our oil and our energy. We don't want to be ruled by them, we understand, we just want to have them as friendly neighbours to trade with. That would make life a wee bit easier. It'd be great if we had 4 of the top 100 universities in the world in Norway. That would help our research and development and education sector. It'd be great if we had an industrial heritage going back 200 years in Norway and everybody heard of our inventors and scientists and all the great things they'd invented over the centuries and respected our technology companies on that basis. It'd be great if we had a diaspora, tens of millions of people that could trace our roots back to Norway, living in all the world's top economies and wanted to help us on our way. And it'd be great with a stronger international brand, a Norwegian brand, so that people would come here on holiday more and knew who we were when we did business with them. If a national poet, for example, was celebrated every year in Moscow and Washington, and everybody would still recognise our national dress, that would make life a wee bit easier. And the point of the story, of course, is that the road campaign laugh at us. We say one day we could be as rich as Norway. In 1917, Norway was poorer than Scotland. They've been dealt a couple of cards. Nice, coherent society, 5 million people, played them very well, and have done well for themselves. Good luck to them. But when you sit down on a blank bit of paper and you write down all the things that an ideal independent country would look like in the 21st century, based on all the evidence, where would it be, how big would it be, what language would it speak, what would its history be like, what natural resources would it have, what education system would it have, etc, 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 etc. You come up with something that looks pretty much like Scotland. And the only bit, there really is the opportunity to build something special here. It's not going to be, there's going to be work to be done, nobody denies that. But as I say, we can build something pretty special. The only bit of the jigsaw that's missing is getting people out in a couple of weeks to put a yes vote in the box, and then we'll pick up from there. So, look forward to your questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Adam. One of the great things for me about being involved in the Yes campaign is the vibrancy, the energy, the enthusiasm of the people involved. I've never ever been involved in anything remotely political before. Less than 50% of our membership are anything to do with the SNP, never mind a voter, never mind a member of a party. And I've got to make some new friends, and included in that, if I can be so bold, Nigel, if I can call you that, is Nigel Mace, who is a retired professor of history. He now is based in Leithen. His career spanned Edinburgh, Plymouth, London and Dartmouth College in the US Ivy League, and who is, so he says, like Professor Tom Devine. Are you saying you're like Professor Tom Devine, Nigel? Scotland's foremost historian. Sorry, I'll read that.
Finish the sentence.
Who, like Professor Sir Tom Devine, is a convert to independence for modern and similar reasons. Nigel Mace.
Oh, thank you, everyone. This is, unlike Ivan, this is just the 4th time I've had the privilege of speaking to fellow Scots about the decision we have to take on the 18th. And I have to say that compared to all the thousands of lectures I've given in my life, nothing has matched the importance of these 4 occasions. I want to begin by talking about 2 things that will not be achieved by a no vote, and then I want to go on and say 4 reasons why I will be voting yes on the 18th. And I'll start with a personal story. It goes back to 1967. Nothing to do with the Hamilton by-election, nothing to do with politics. It happened to be the first year in which I went to the United States of America. And I went to a conference on reform in higher education. And I went with all my wonderful bright new ideas about reform in higher education, but I also went with an enormous pride in the United Kingdom system of higher education. Nationally funded, independent, available to everybody who could profit from it, and even with state grants provided. And I also went with enormous pride in the United Kingdom's welfare state, and especially its National Health Service. Due to the generosity of my hosts, I visited a clutch of the finest universities, from a great state university in Champaign-Urbana to Chicago, Boston, MIT, Harvard, and New York. And when I returned, despite the fact that I was very impressed with all these places, I returned with my faith in the United Kingdom's system of higher education and my belief in the values of its welfare state even more deeply entrenched. And in the subsequent years, I have not lost my fealty to those values. I'm afraid, however, that the United Kingdom has. So when I vote yes on the 18th, I will not be voting to leave it. The United Kingdom has been leaving me for many years. And a no vote on the 18th is not going to restore to life the United Kingdom in which it was once possible to be so proud. The second thing that a no vote will not do is it will not deliver a single new power or advance in any way the standing of the Holyrood Parliament. Now, in fact, we all know this if we think about it, because the parties who are currently suggesting that they have various promises, pledges, offers, etc., for increased powers are precisely the same parties who, by their carefully managed disagreements, made absolutely sure there was no Devo anything on the ballot paper for us on the 18th. And the reason they did that? Well, it's quite simple. Everybody knew that Devo anything on that ballot paper would almost certainly have won hands down in the referendum. And had it won, those same parties who, when in office, had failed to introduce any legislation to improve the condition of the Holyrood Parliament in any significant way would have been forced to do precisely what they had failed to do when they had the power to do it. The fact that they did not do it when they could, and they would not allow us to choose when we could have chosen, means that we know they will not do it now. They are not to be believed. There is nothing coming from a no vote except possibly something worse. So let me now turn to the 4 reasons why I am voting yes. And I want to start with what to me is the most important one. And it's here I feel I particularly share common ground with Tom Devine. I will call it the real democratic deficit. Now, I don't just mean the fact that Scotland often votes for a party of government which is then not enthroned in Westminster. That happens, of course. We have at the moment one Conservative MP, and yet we have a Conservative-nominated government. But there was a period of time, what historians call the post-war consensus, from 1945 through the 40s, 50s, well on into the 60s, when one could genuinely look at the UK as a single polity, where it was reasonable to argue that a vote in Cardrona, or in Leithen, or Glasgow, or Aberdeen was the same as a vote in Manchester, or Leeds, or Birmingham, or in the southwest of England, where I spent most of my career. But that is no longer the case. We do not have a single polity. We have 2 quite distinct and different polities. And you know, since 1999, it's been remarkable. We've been able to watch in embryo what a Scottish independent government might be like. We've had Holyrood with a Labour administration, a Labour Liberal administration, a minority national administration, and now majority national government. And all of them have trended in broadly the same direction. Social democratic, progressive in matters of welfare and society. And what has happened down south in Westminster? It has gone in exactly the opposite direction. Let's take the NHS as an example. The NHS in England no longer exists in the form in which it was originally conceived. The very obligation on the Secretary of State to provide for a unified service across the country as a whole has been removed from the statute book by a very clever piece of wording in the first clause of the bill of the 2012 Act. Furthermore, it has become fragmented, commercialised, privatised. What has happened in Scotland? Since 1999, exactly the opposite has happened. The marketisation reforms, so-called, of Tony Blair have been turned away from, and the Scottish Health Service has gone back to the health service as it was originally conceived, a unified, publicly funded, publicly provided, in the vast majority of the cases, service across the nation as a whole. We don't just have two different polities. We have two polities that are completely out of kilter. They are going in, if you like, diverging directions or even clashing directions. And it is a simple matter of democratic health that we cannot go on with a situation in which our smaller polity of a mere 5 million people is constantly going to be overwhelmed by the political opinions expressed in a different voting system by the 58 million people that make up the rest of the United Kingdom, where things are ruled by a handful, about 40 marginal seats, largely in the south of England. For Scotland to remain, indeed I would say for Scotland to become once again a proper democracy, we must have a separate Scottish government. And that means an independent government, and that means a yes vote on the 18th. The second reason I will turn to is the matter of the use of our natural resources. Now, I could be talking about, as you've heard, all sorts of things. Whisky, I could be talking about renewables, I could be talking about the medical and technical sector, but I want to talk about oil and gas. And here, I've left around some copies of this paper on the chairs for you to read. I'm amused that this paper has come out today, because in my previous speeches I've been pointing out that it isn't just 40 or 50 years of the North Sea that we've got left. And that, incidentally, was last year's estimates before the new field was opened off Aberdeen about 2 months ago with 22 wells, and before the huge discoveries of Bentley, which were just a couple of weeks ago to the east of Shetland. But what this paper makes clear is that what I was suggesting to audiences in my previous talks, that there were decades beyond that to come, is, like the Scottish National Party in the 1970s, a woeful underestimate of what there is to come. This paper is saying quite clearly that in the Scottish Atlantic margin, that huge area of Scottish waters to the west of Shetland and of the Outer Hebrides, and in the West Coast and Clyde area where we couldn't investigate because of Trident, there are 100 years of oil and gas resources still to come. We are looking at the possibility of a century and a half of oil and gas. There are only 2 oil-rich countries in the world that do not have a sovereign wealth oil fund. One is the pitiful state of Iraq. The other one is Scotland. That is a scandal, and it must come to an end, and it will do with a yes vote. My third reason is I want to see an end to huge expenditures of our money and resources on projects from which we derive no direct benefit at all. I could be talking about the new London sewer scheme or Crossrail, but I'm going to talk about that high-speed train which may arrive at Leeds Station in 2030, and for which there are no plans for it to be extended north to Scotland. Yet we will be paying £4.7 billion towards the cost of that. Now that's bad, but what is infinitely worse is the expenditure that we are going to be coughing up for the redevelopment, indeed the illegal redevelopment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of the Trident nuclear missile system. Trident is not only a ludicrous weapon, which plainly has got nothing whatsoever to do with the kind of dangers which we face today, as we're painfully aware from everything we've been reading in the press in the last few days. It is also a deeply immoral weapon, and I speak with some warmth on this because, like Ivan, I'm a Glaswegian. It's parked on the doorstep of my home city and makes of that city and about 20–25% of the Scottish population the largest nuclear target in Western Europe. That is something which is not only dangerous, it's not only immoral, but it is also set to cost us £1 billion, that's the Scots, £1 billion per year for at least a decade, and that is on the current estimates, and you know what happens to defence costs normally. So that is my third reason. My fourth reason is that I'm not a narrow nationalist, I'm an internationalist. I want to vote yes because I want to make sure that Scotland remains in the European Union and remains a part, in fact, re-establishes itself within the continent whose culture we've always really belonged to. And make no mistake about it, when we vote yes, we will remain members of the European Union. All of us in this room are EU citizens. That can't be removed. There's no mechanism for so doing. The only country ever to leave the EU was Denmark. It had to have a separate referendum after it was independent from Denmark, Greenland. After it was independent from Denmark, it had to have a second referendum on the issue of EU membership. And after that, it took another 3 years for it to finally leave the EU. We will remain in the EU, as has been shown by a couple of articles, particularly by Professor Shona Douglas-Scott, who is the Professor of European Law at Oxford. We will remain within the European Union under Article 48, and there will be what is called the process of internal enlargement. The only danger to our place in Europe is a no vote, which would leave us with the danger of being hoiked out of Europe by Europhobic and Eurosceptic voters, mainly in the south of England, in the referendum in 2017. So for those 4 reasons, I want us to vote yes. I want us to vote yes to become a proper democracy again. I want us to harness our resources for our own needs. I want us to stop wasting our resources on things from which we get no direct benefit, and I want us to re-establish our place in the world. And when I say us, I'm talking about one of the biggest resources that Scotland has. You, me, all of us here. According to a recent report, Scotland is the most educated country in Europe, bar none, and the 3rd most educated country in the entire world. So let's be clear. On the 18th, we will take into this very, very special referendum, into the polling booths, carrying with us the most precious commodity of all, the future of all our futures. I'm reminded of the lines that Robert Bolt wrote for Sir Thomas More in the play A Man for All Seasons, talking about the solemnity of having sworn an oath. He says that it's as though a man held his life like water in his hands. If I do open my fingers then, I need not look to find my life again. And that is what would happen with a no vote. But with a yes vote, we will not only preserve the safety and the well-being of our present, we will also secure the future of our futures, our children's and our grandchildren's futures. And I'm reminded of one of our greatest poets, William Souter, who, amid the flares and flames of the Second World War, wrote about a choice that faced that generation that not only fought against Nazism, but fought for a better future. And he wrote in a poem called Scotland as follows: Have ye the unca sicht that sees a tween and a tween, this world that lows in licht, yon world that hasna been. It's our late for fear, our early for disclaim. When ye come hameless here, and ken ye are at hame, have we the insight to see that building that better home, that better Scotland, depends upon our yes vote on the 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Our third speaker is Sara Sheridan. Sara was named in 2014 as one of the Saltire Society's 365 most influential Scottish women, past and present. She is an Edinburgh-based historical novelist, occasional journalist and blogger, has taken part in Yestival and bus party tours, and was the first guest on Referendum TV. Sara is also patron of registered local charity It's Good to Give, which provides support for critically ill children and their families. Sara.
That's beautiful of you. My mother provides a really important service whenever I speak, and I normally speak about books. I don't normally speak about politics, but she sits up at the back, and if she can't hear me, she just puts up her hand. And if anyone can't hear me, please do that, because I know that my voice drops a bit, and I'm used to more used to speaking with a microphone. I'm not going to give you any facts and figures tonight. I think Dorothy has recruited me to come and talk about a very personal story, about my story, and to talk about perhaps more the emotional side of the debate and what's been going on. So I have to come clean absolutely at the start and say I started as a no voter. Horror. And I come from a family of no voters, and we are now divided. We have fantastic dinners where we all shout and scream at each other, and there's fallings out and fallings in, and people change their mind, and there's chocolate, and it's just amazing. So, and the reason I was a no voter right at the beginning is because, like you, I'm an internationalist. And I write books that we sell all over the world, and I tour all over the place. I tour a lot in England, talking at book festivals and libraries and bookshops, and I am about being outward looking. I am about a big world. And my initial knee-jerk reaction was that if I voted, that the yes vote was going to be inward looking. The yes vote would make Scotland smaller, and we would be provincial. It was that kind of Scottish cringe thing. Now, there's a really interesting thing about how you make decisions, and we all make decisions in the same way. We don't think we do what they do, but we do. There's been quite a lot of research, and as a novelist I know about this because I look into it in a very great detail, because my job is to make up characters who aren't real and make them sound real. So here's how we all make decisions. We decide what we want to do on an emotional level, and that might be having soup for lunch, or it might be bringing the red dress out of the cupboard, or it could be, you know, whatever it is. And then we look for evidence to back up our wonderful decision. And it happens so quickly you don't even realise that you're doing it. But over 90% of the decisions that you make day to day are made in that way. They're made with your gut. Now, if you go to the wardrobe and you take out the red dress and there's a stain on it, or you go to the shop to buy your soup for lunch as a carry-out and they don't have any soup left, it's very easy to change your mind about those small decisions. It's not so easy to change your mind about the large decisions. Decisions that are about the essence of you, if you like. You know, your value system. Decisions about politics. Decisions about religion, perhaps. And so when I started to spot that there was a really cogent yes argument that was outward looking and that was international and that would let Scotland take its place in the world, like many other independent nations do of the same kind of size and not an entirely different character, I kind of ignored it for a while. But eventually I realised I was going to have to do something about it. Now, if you're a historical novelist like me, you are a SWAT. That is what you are. You spend your whole time in libraries, and you spend a lot of time just trying to figure out how you're going to create a story that sounds real. So you spend a lot of time researching. It's a big part of my job, probably about 40% of my time I spend doing research. So I decided at New Year I was going to make my New Year's resolution, and this year it was, I'm going to give up reading fiction. And that is a big ask for someone like me. And I'm going to start reading history and economics and politics and try and figure out what the hell is going on here. Because it's really difficult to make this decision. It's a really big decision, and I felt it was incumbent upon me to take this thing seriously. So I started. And what I found was really extraordinary and entirely unexpected. I had not, I knew nothing, I discovered, about my own country. And I knew very little as well about how it could be. There was this real vision. I mean, I get to meet politicians a reasonable amount of the time. I'm in and out of TV studios and radio stations and all the rest of it. And none of these people had the vision, the real vision that I could see was happening in the Yes campaign. It's been so exciting. There's this huge grassroots movement of people, men and women together, and you don't get that in politics a lot, who are imagining a more exciting country. They're imagining a place that they want to live, and that their children want to live. And it's really important that we're doing that. And that's what this vote is about. Now, I changed my mind. And I'm now a yes voter. And I did it with a mixture of those facts and figures. And I discovered lots of things about myself that I didn't know before. I discovered that I'm a Democrat, and I really didn't know that. And I discovered that I'm very, very Scottish, because I'm really Thrawn. And one of the things that annoys me more than anything else is people telling me that we can't do something. And I have a lot of friends who are like that as well. Many of my female friends. Many of us made the decision to yes, but for entirely different reasons. I've got one friend who won't talk about money, but she's voting yes because of Trident. I've got another friend who's in business, you'll like this, Ivan, and she says, if they think we can't do it, I'll have them. We are going to run this country. So it's the best bloody country in the whole bloody world, and I'm not having it. That's what she thinks she can do.
Good for the women.
For me, I think, maybe it's more about social justice, actually, because everyone has their own reasons. This is a personal decision for every single one of us. And there's no average voter, there's no general voter, because we've all got one vote. So we're all the average voter in that regard. So your vote, each of your votes, is just as important as everyone else's. So it's a really big opportunity. I suppose lastly, I started to write about the 1950s about 5 or 6 years ago. I write murder mysteries set in the 50s, and they're very, very British, which I love about them, actually. And I look at it and think, that's our past. And now I think, where are we going to go? Maybe I'll write a futuristic one at some point. Anyway, being a SWAT, when I started to write about the 1950s, I spent a lot of time looking at video. And I went down to the Pathy Film Archive, and I watched videos of the 1950s. And I found out a whole load of stuff. But the biggest thing that I found out about the 1950s, and the most shocking thing about the 1950s, was watching men talk about women. It was horrific. I have really good deportment. So I was sitting up in the chair like this, and by the end of watching these videos, I was like down, totally slumped up, couldn't believe what I was hearing. Horrifying, absolutely horrifying sexism. Also not good, white people talking about black people, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. So I phoned my mother. I came out of the viewing room in BAFTA, and I phoned my mother. And I said, because my mother met my father during the 50s. And I said, did Dad used to talk to you this way? Is this how Dad was? And she said, oh, sweetheart, it took me till 1972 to train him out of it. And this has really stayed with me, because my mother changed the world. And so did yours. If you're the same age as me, maybe it was your granny. Who knows? But my mother is not extraordinary. You know, she's not a political activist. She definitely would not call herself a feminist. She's never had a job since she married Dad. She's an upper middle class Edinburgh housewife who plays a mean game of bridge. That's my mother. So I tell that story when I go and talk to people about historical novels. My publisher is very keen on me doing what they call non-traditional book audiences. Non-traditional book audiences are corporate audiences. And corporates have a huge big problem these days because there's a lot of women. The biggest growing group of entrepreneurs is women. And they don't know what to do with them to entertain them, because they don't want to go to the rugbies. They're completely confused. They're really happy to trolley in a novelist who can talk about women's history and give them a bit of inspiration. So I tell them that story. I say, you know, I was watching the film and it was really awful, and phoned my mother, and Mum said, you know, it took me till 1972 to train around it. And then I say, you know, my mother changed the world, and I look at them, I look at someone right in the middle, I find a woman who looks really smart, and I say, what are we going to do? And until recently, you know, I didn't have an answer for that. I have an answer now, because we're going to vote yes.
Thank you, Sara. Okay, we'd like to open it to the floor and see if anyone would like to be bold enough to go first and ask any questions you may have of our panel.
I would like to know who has been recruiting the vandals that have taken the no thanks posters down all the way from here to Edinburgh. Could you tell me that?
No, I couldn't, because I have no idea who did it. Can I answer this one?
Yeah.
I'll answer this in my capacity as chair of Yes Scottish Borders. We have had countless yes signs vandalised.
Well, we haven't noticed that here.
Well, maybe you haven't noticed, but it was a full page in the Peebleshire, because it happened in Peebles and it happened in Walkerburn, and we absolutely condemn any acts of vandalism. People should be entitled to show their support for whatever their views are, without fear of damage, criminal damage or theft to their property. And I've actually spoken to Brian McCrow, who's involved, he lives in Cardrona, you may know Brian, in the Better Together campaign, and we are going to put out a joint statement and a photo of us, which is actually taken on Peebles High Street, saying, you know, arm in arm type thing, saying, look guys, please both refrain from it, because it doesn't do MD any credit.
It's a bit disgusting.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Completely unnecessary, if it's democratic.
Oh, absolutely. There's no excuse for it. Both sides have done it. We've had huge wooden signs stolen. I can barely fit them in my car, and I have a big car, so goodness knows how it happened. But we agree with you. No place in the referendum. Both sides are going to put a statement on it. Brian and I swapped emails on it yesterday, actually. Yes, question at the back.
Thank you very much for doing that, but can I just tell you, in a shop, a Yes shop in Pennycook, when the door was to be opened in the morning, faeces was smeared all over the door handles. So, I agree with you, it shouldn't be happening on any side, but can I say it's happening in both sides?
Oh no, it is, absolutely.
I just take slight exception to who recruited these people. I mean, these guys are vandals. They're headbangers. I don't think they're recruiting them. They're just going out and doing it. And if there was some way of stopping it, who wouldn't?
I don't think they're actually activists that are involved on either side. But they may be on the fringe of either side. We don't know. But it is happening all over
No one's
Scotland.
suggesting that. And the other important thing to say here is it does not in any way reflect the nature of the campaign. Because the nature of the campaign is of positivity, is of engaging with each other. I mean, we've had so many meetings. We had 80 people in a room in Walkerburn. When's the last time that happened for a public meeting? So people are engaging in this process in a way that they never have before, and that is a vastly positive thing. And of course, there is a tiny minority on the margins.
Callum,
Yes.
Could I ask a question? This leaflet came through the doors in Cardrona today, actually.
Yep.
And the middle of it is about our money is safer and goes further if we vote no, right? And it gives you 4 examples. One of them, it says that the average mortgage will go up by $1,300 a year if we vote yes. Yeah. There's another one says that cost of independence if we vote to leave the UK, it's going to cost us 16% more when we compare our bills with the Irish people who are, well, they're part of the euro, I suppose that's maybe what they're getting at here. But my main point is probably the cost of mortgages, which seems to be going up. And I also heard Willie Rennie in a debate with Gordon Brewer on Sunday. And Willie then he kept threatening that if we vote yes, if you buy a car, your loans will go up, your mortgages will go up. And Gordon Brewer kept saying to him, well, I can understand the national government, if you borrow money, depending on the money markets, your rates would go up. But if you get a mortgage, say from NatWest or whatever, you know, there's no way you could buy a mortgage from anywhere. So I'd just like to hear the panel's point of view. If we do vote yes, will mortgages go up? Will the bills go up?
Okay, no, it's a good question. Thank you.
Yes.
Shall I take a gentle?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you go.
I have strong views about this. Everything that comes to your door, whether it's from the Yes campaign or the No campaign, is effectively propaganda. And your role in this is to get on the internet and try and figure out what makes sense to you. And that's the first point. And I know that because I research history and you research history, and you know that it's easy to look at it and say, oh, this happened and that happened, therefore something else happened. But when you're in the present, you can't tell what's going to happen. Even the economists, the guys in suits, don't know what's going to happen, and we all found that out to our detriment in 2007 and 2008. Because if they knew what was actually going to happen and they sat and watched that happen, I mean, that is unthinkable. They didn't know. They lost massively. Lots of people lost massively at that level. So first of all, the future is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen here. We have to take our chances. But I think our future is better placed if we have control over our own budgets. My view is we've looked at what a devolved parliament has done for us with only 7% of the budget, of its budget. If it had 100% of its budget, I think it would do a whole lot more for us. And I don't think the Scottish Parliament in any way wants that kind of stuff happening. So there's two things. You need to research it, you need to look at it, and everything you see is propaganda. You should be questioning anything. And second of all, nobody knows what's going to happen. We can only look at where we are and make a decent guess. And you probably have some figures.
Yeah, there's some there. And this is also what I touched on earlier, but it goes right to the heart of that point, because the way the No campaign works is they hunt about for something that they can take and then extrapolate that and make some assumptions and blow it up and then put some kind of numbers on it that's going to scare people. I mean, that's the whole strategy. So it is important, Sara says, to dig back and look at where the numbers are coming from. As I said, that's and it all comes from the fact that they would say that mortgages would go up and car loans would go up and all this stuff would go up because the cost of borrowing would go up, and what they're talking about is the cost of government, much it costs the government to borrow money to fund its debt on the international markets. That's where the logic coming from, that's where they get these numbers from. Because you're right, and Gordon Brewer made Willie Rennie look really stupid in that interview, because he just kept asking them, well, if I've got an agreement with a car loan company, why would it go up? And Willie Rennie would say, well it would. It's obvious it would, of course it would, but he couldn't actually explain it. Because he's just been told to feed a line, right, and he's not got any understanding of where it's coming from. As I said earlier, this is the reality of what governments actually pay to the markets in terms of interest rates for the government borrowing. As I said earlier, what you'll notice is that most countries in Europe are paying less than the UK, including an awful lot of small countries that are paying an awful lot less than the UK. So the UK pays more than most countries for its borrowing at the moment. And the numbers show Scotland would have a lower debt because our GDP is bigger, and that's not going to change. Our deficit and debt, whatever happens when the negotiations, is going to be lower than the UK deficit and debt to GDP ratios. So, if anything, it would be lower. But in reality, the way that the debt negotiation, too technical about it, the way the debt negotiation will work is that the UK has the debt with the markets. Those interest rates are fixed for the debt they've signed up to for the coming. The average maturity UK debt is 15 years, some of it goes out to 14, 50 years. So those interest rates are kind of what they are. Scotland won't be taking that debt on independently because the markets have got a contract with the UK government and they're not going to change that. The UK government's already said we'll honour those contracts. What will happen is there'll be a side deal between Scotland and the UK for Scotland to pay money to the UK government if we take on some debt, but they'll have the agreement. And it's like the difference between your landlord's got an agreement with the mortgage company and you as a tenant playing the landlord. It's that kind of side agreement, that's the way it'll work in reality. So even if it was true that Scotland would have higher borrowing costs, which it isn't when you look at the evidence of small countries, it wouldn't actually happen because all we'd be doing is paying the UK back based on their current interest rates. So the whole thing's completely utter fantasy, and it really shows up the depths they'll go to fabricate a whole bunch of nonsense.
What worries me is that we're talking about vandalism.
Yeah.
Well, to me, this is vandalism.
Oh, of course, it's just
because we've got 2 weeks to go, and Willie Rennie was bringing this subject up on Sunday, and then this drops through the letterbox today. So to me, it seems a concerted effort to produce wrong information. And how much more are we going to get between now and the 18th of September? That's what worries me.
That's
there's not a long time to refute it.
But the reality is, and that's one of the great things about a long campaign, is we've had it for 2 years, and there's only so much nonsense they can put there on pensions, on currency, on EU, on defence, on you name it, right? There's probably about 8 or 9 subjects that they just keep battering. And they've got a campaign grid, and they kind of just go round it and round it and round it, and they know that next week it's going to be currency, the week after it's going to be borrowing costs, the week after it's going to, and that's the way they just kind of plan the thing, and it's absolutely, totally coordinated. But they've been round and round and round it so many times that folk, to be fair, a lot of folk have heard it, investigated, debunked it, and talked about it, and a lot of folk are just punched up with it and think, I don't believe anything you say anymore. So I think the effect of it is becoming less and less. And you're seeing that in the polls because folk don't believe it anymore. Some do, but many don't.
I think the Prime Minister's now actually saying that we'll be outcasts if we get independence because we'll be defaulting on our debts.
Gordon Brown.
Yeah, I think the Prime Minister said it today too, though.
Oh, did it? Oh,
which is absolutely ludicrous.
They're all having a shot.
As you said, they're not our debts.
Can I take a question? The gentleman in the back.
Another sort of economics question, if you don't mind. And I'm not an economist, I don't really understand, so it'd be great to clarify. As I understand it, the rest of the UK will set the interest rates for Scotland, and at the same time, the Scottish Government, if it is a yes vote, say that they'll be taking control of sort of all the economy, as it were. But can it really take control of the economy when it doesn't set interest rates, which is, from my reading of the BBC websites and so on, is kind of the biggest lever that government has for controlling the economy?
Well, the first thing on the toolkit for controlling the economy, interest rates is one thing, right? And the reality in the modern interconnected global economy is interest rates aren't really that significant a tool. They're very limited and very blunt. Because if you're in a world where you've got the US Fed sets its interest rate, the ECB sets its interest rate, between them they're 50% of the world economy. Everybody else has kind of got to fit in with that. If you move very far away from any of that, the markets hammer you. So the reality about you've got freedom to do what you want on interest rates is nonsense, and they're very limited in what they can do. That's the first point. The second point is, of course, at the moment interest rates are set with zero regard to Scotland anyway. They're set for what suits the housing market in the southeast of England, right? That's the reality of it, because that's the valve that turn on and off to manage the growth, overheating or underheating of the economy. So that's what drives where interest rates go anyway, so it makes no difference.
Well, that's just the point in the time that concerns me, because our interest rates are going to be set by what is good for the south of England.
Well, I mean, what will happen is there'll be, we'll have representation on the board of the Bank of England, right, which is more than we've got just now, so have some influence. You're right, it won't be a whole bunch of influence, but it'll be more than we've got at the moment, which is zero. But the main point is that interest rates aren't the be-all and end-all. They're one tool in the toolkit, and they're not the most effective, and they're not any of the
so what are the other levers that
well, so the other is what you do in taxation and investments, what you do in income tax, national insurance, where you set the tax plans, corporation tax, air passenger duty, you through all the stuff you talk about, the stuff we talk about for job generation, childcare policy, the investment in exports, reindustrialisation, support for businesses that want to export, having policies that are tailored to the manufacturing sector reindustrialisation compared to policies that are only there to support the financial sector in the City of London. What you do with the oil industry, you've had 16 changes in taxation regime in the oil industry, because you look upon it as a cash cow and a piggy bank, whereas the Scottish Government look upon it as an important sector. It's got to be treated with a bit of respect, so you've not got these spikes. And the reason that the Scottish revenue goes up and down isn't because of the oil price, which has been flat at about $108 a barrel for the last 3.5 years. The reason it goes up and down is because the investment goes up and down. When investment goes up and down, they get right off against tax. And the reason investment's been going up and down, I mean, 2 years ago it was practically nothing, last year it was 14.5 billion. is because they keep chopping and changing the rules around about what you can get tax relief on to try to screw more money out of the industry short term. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do that are going to promote and drive the economy, and interest rates is only one of those things.
The other thing about interest rates, actually, which is quite interesting, because of quantitative easing, and I was quite right, it's not easy to move interest rates, and you can't move out of sync with other countries. I would slide slightly out of date because these rates change on a daily basis. Spain is now borrowing cheaper than the UK, and in fact the UK's demand on its 10-year bonds rose 6 basis points yesterday. But bank rate has been at the current level for an unprecedented sort of 5 years. If you look historically, you see wee movements as they try to adjust the economy. That's no longer an instrument. And it's bank base rate that relates to your question about mortgage. So if it's not going anywhere, then it's unlikely there should be other reasons affecting mortgage rates.
Yeah. I'll just add, of course, that everything Ivan says is absolutely right, and nobody would expect the French government or the German government to say that they weren't properly independent because they have to have regard to the European Central Bank's interest rates.
But is it not fair to say, sorry, Fanny?
No, that's fine.
Is it not fair to say that part of the havoc in the Eurozone over the last 3 or 4 years was caused by having a fixed interest rate and economies going up?
Yeah, I mean, the Eurozone kind of gets, it's a bit of a kind of, I realised to kick the Eurozone, but you have a look at the Eurozone, and I do business in a lot of those countries, and if you look at Germany, Finland, Austria, the Netherlands, Belgium, they're not the ones that people talk about, because they're the ones that are doing just fine, thanks very much, and all very happy with the arrangement they've got, and it works very well for them. You're talking about your Portugal and your Greece and whatever. Frankly, if you look at Greece, the last thing the Greeks wanted was to leave the euro. Right? They were worried they were going to get kicked out of the euro over the last 3 or 4 years because they realised that backdoor things were, if they were outside the protection of the euro, they would be much, much worse. And the Greeks were saying, if we're outside the euro, we'll be like Africa. That's what they were worried about. And the problem Greece had was nothing to do with the euro. The problem Greece had was because Greece severely mismanaged their economy, ran up unsustainable debt, didn't collect their taxes, etc., etc., etc. Doesn't matter what currency you're using, if you do that kind of behaviour, you're going to get into those kind of problems.
The point I was trying to make, though, is that if you don't control your interest rates, you get in a mess.
No, well, that's not true. I'll give you examples of those countries in Europe where that absolutely isn't a problem. And if you look at any of those countries, if you look at Germany and Austria, or Germany and Finland, or Germany and the Netherlands, which are the comparable examples, none of those are as close in terms of the similarity in their economies as Scotland and England are. Scotland and England are the closest in terms of their economy across all of those European comparisons. So it works fine for them, and they're all perfectly happy with it. For Scotland and England, it's absolutely not an issue.
Could I turn this around?
Yeah.
I mean, this is just a problem that I see from my own perspective, and I don't know what the answer is likely to be either within the Union or in independent Scotland. I remember as a child a discussion on the TV when the interest rates were sky high. I mean, enormous interest rates.
15%. 15%.
That was the rate for my first mortgage. And ever since then I've said, well, what would I be paying if the rate was 15%? On the assumption that if it was there once it could go back. But this was before then. And people were saying, well, we're talking so much about these terribly high mortgage rates, but what about the savers? Now, the other point of view at the moment is it's not so much savers as such as the pensions situation. I mean, people have been saving and they've been encouraged to save into pension pots on the belief that the capital in the pension pot is going to yield enough interest to be able to keep them during retirement. Now, we've got the situation at the moment where people are living longer and longer, and okay, they may be retiring a few years later, but not enormously later. People are living a long time post-retirement. There's only so much of a pension pot that you can reasonably accumulate, and if you're having to live on essentially the capital, because the interest rates are so low, then this is quite serious, because the UK state pension is absolutely derisory. I mean, it's easily the lowest in Europe, and people are talking in theory about means testing it. So I'm worried about my own generation that is seeing the pension pot that we've accumulated, that was supposed to keep us reasonably well, with reasonable amount of spending power, putting money into the economy, because we're spending that money, actually having to scrimp and save penny by penny and not spending on consumer goods, because it isn't. I've seen my own pension.
So what, some more language?
Yeah, and the point is that we're now coming up with another generation who are being loaded with student debts and loaded with enormous mortgages. The rates may be low, but the house prices are so high that the mortgages are still enormous. How do we get out of this? And how
of the problem of long-term pensions, it's the problem which is common across the whole of the Western world, and particularly in Europe, of a demographic challenge in population. Insufficient people of younger age who are going to be a working population who can help to generate the revenue for future pensions, etc. And again, I think the Scottish Government's been very clear about this. We have, I think, over the last 10 years, an average net migration in Scotland, or is it the last 5 years, of 22,000 a year. And they project that it needs to be 24,000 a year, in other words, an increase of 2,000 in net migration in order to create the economic circumstances that will help to generate a sustainable situation in terms of state pensions. Now, when one thinks of that 2,000 net migration, people tend to think of that in terms of immigration. But of course, net migration is not just about people coming in, it's about not losing people going out. And one of Scotland's long-term problems has been population loss. Population loss particularly among the young, the talented. He said modestly, having had to go to England to work. One of the things that an independent Scotland could reasonably hope to do with its substantial wealth and with very different policies would be to create the conditions in which there would be a regeneration of industry and of business that would help to keep our own young people in Scotland itself. And just while I'm saying that, doubters may be saying, well, just a minute, why should it be expected that there's more money to do socially worthwhile things like that in an independent Scotland? After all, haven't there been reports from the Institute of Fiscal Studies that say, etc., on the negative side? I just point out to you that all those studies by things like the Institute of Fiscal Studies are based on the daft assumption that an independent Scotland would proceed to follow exactly the same policies as the UK does at the moment. So, just think about some of the figures that have been talked about this evening. If we're not spending 1 billion a year on Trident, if we're not spending 300 million a year on just running the present Trident system, that's 1.3 billion, and I've only started. And a recent study of the amount that we would be saving straight away by not following policies which it's already clear that Scotland is not committed to follow is something like 6 billion a year. So there are the resources to do things differently, to do the reindustrialising, to create more business activity and to help to retain talented young people in Scotland.
Could I come back to that just a second?
If it's brief,
instinctively, that's the, without having the figures, that would be the view I've taken. And I have said to people, I'm voting yes because coming up to, I mean, I should have retired by now, but I haven't, for the reasons I just said. Because I foresee my chances of a comfortable retirement better. But when we've got better together, telling the pensioners that they better vote no, because otherwise they'll lose their pensions, what do we do?
Well, I'm afraid one has to very politely point out that they're lying. Because Well, I'm sorry, I'm a bit old-fashioned about it. I think a fib is a fib. When we've had the pensions minister actually in the House of Commons making a definitive statement that people's state pension will be paid irrespective of the result, then for Better Together to say otherwise is, I'm afraid, a big fib.
The DWP has actually issued letters to people
yes,
as
indeed,
well.
Indeed.
The party telling the pensioners will lose their pensions and the European citizens that they'll be deported.
Yeah.
Another question at the front.
That'll affect my wife because she's French. So.
I know who
all
you
the,
are.
There's maybe more than one French woman.
all the questions about the interest rates and all the economic questions, it is all figures and facts and things which are probably way above my understanding of it all. But the way I sense it is that it's a bit of a risk assessment. You know, at the end of the day, we don't know what the future is going to hold for us. Is it going to be 6.15% interest rate? Is it going to be 0.61? Are we going to have 4 billion less of oil tax revenue or 4 billion more, etc., etc.? I haven't got a clue. But am I willing to take the risk? Yes, I am. But on that specific point, about taking a risk, is there not a risk that come Independence Day, that in our lovely houses in Cardrona, for instance, we're all sitting on quite a lot of negative equity because the price values, sink, and my mortgage is X, Y, Z. Is that not a risk? I mean, I've not heard anyone talk about that.
Property prices?
Yes, property prices falling. I mean, I have my own personal views. Aberdeen's fine, Edinburgh's fine.
Well, I'll give you an answer on that. I mean, I was kind of having the conversation. I didn't realise that you're actually so close. I came from Glasgow. I didn't realise that you're actually so close to Edinburgh, relatively speaking. I used to look at when Edinburgh becomes a proper capital city of a proper independent country, the boost in terms of the folk that want to come and live here, embassies setting up, buying up property, all kinds of international institutions have to have a presence there because it's a country and they need to deal with government to government. We have a lot of business to government stuff. Head offices of companies will need to be there. Take an example, the oil industry. If you're in the oil industry at the moment, you want to influence government in terms of tax regime, licence allocation, policy, investment, whatever, you've got to have a presence in London that talks government to business. In future, all those decisions will be made in Edinburgh, so you need to transfer the folk that do that to Edinburgh. And that goes for a whole bunch of industries. And that's before you can start talking about the, I've got some numbers there on airport footfall. Oslo Airport, 23 million passengers a year through just their main airport, not the second airports. Copenhagen, 22 million passengers a year. Edinburgh Airport, 9.5 million. Right. Even if you had Glasgow, it's still only like 16 million. There's a far less traffic comes through as a country of 5 million people. Because we're not an independent country, we're a proper capital city, there's less people come to visit. Less tourists, less business, etc. That's where you start talking about passenger duty. So for lots of reasons, there will be more people coming through, there will be more people doing business here, more government and international agencies setting up stuff here. And I'm kind of struggling to see why that won't push Edinburgh property prices through the roof. Now, the problem we're going to have is the opposite. The problem we have is the opposite. The problem we're going to have is keep prices to a sensible level for people to afford them, and that's going to spur a house pricing.
And is that the same which is for Glasgow as well?
When Edinburgh get a real boost, Glasgow get it, but not to the same extent. My guess, right?
Well, we've got a kind of trial example, haven't we, from what happened when the Parliament was established, and that made a very significant difference. And this will make a much bigger one. But I agree, the real problem for an independent Scotland will be providing housing that people can afford. And on that again, Holyrood has already got an embryo decent record. I've forgotten the exact figures. Was it 2 years ago? I think Scotland built affordable housing that was 10 times the amount of affordable housing built in England in the same year, and we are 11th of the population. So we've already got a toehold in the right direction. Question there, and then I'll come back.
I have two brief questions. One of them might be brief. The first one is just, so when Scotland becomes an independent country and we're exporting to the rest of the UK, or what's left of the UK, how does that affect the import and export charges and VAT and things?
No, it doesn't, because you're in the European Union. It makes absolute difference.
So there's no change to any of that?
Okay, I'll come back for a second.
Right.
Right, gentleman at the back.
I think you guys are fantastic and it'll be a big help to everyone. I think if you were on the telly a lot more than some of the politicians. But a couple of questions. How would you allay the fears of people, like say for example in the defence industry, that probably won't go for their jobs? And academic side of things, investment in the universities, folk are making a lot of skin noise about that in the University of Oregon, which I talked with Liz Ruddock a couple of weeks ago and she was reminding me of all the state of Scotland in terms of land. And we don't get any money from the land because it doesn't essentially belong to us. And how could we get money from the vast majority of Scottish land that isn't owned and doing us any benefit? Would that be through taxes? Or how could we benefit from that?
You've done what David did. In fact, you've got one more. That's kind of 3 questions in one sentence, so fair play. Right, I'm not sure where to start.
Start with the Navy. Start with the Navy, because what you're talking about are the jobs at Fastlane that will have to go. Better Together routinely talks about something between 6,000 and 8,000 jobs. In fact, there are only over just 500 jobs.
520.
521
apparently.
That are actually involved with Trident. The plan for Fastlane is that it will become the centre of, or the main port for the Scottish Navy, Scottish Naval Service. And that will generate a whole load of jobs. And actually, our naval service is pants at the moment. There was in the North Sea, that's a technical term, it's a military term. In the North Sea earlier this year, there was a Russian warship arrived, and it took over a day for a naval ship to come up from the south of England. We have an immense coastline. If you lay our coastline end to end, there is no commercial flight from Edinburgh or Glasgow Airport that can make it to the end of that. And we have 800 islands. We need a really corking naval service, and we don't have one at the moment. So that's something that we'll need to invest in. A whole load of jobs available there. We'll need a really decent RAF, and we'll need a smaller military force, a smaller army, because we're unlikely to use that. And the other place that there will be jobs is in the Secret Service, effectively. So what the job that MI5 and MI6 do, and Stella Remington, the ex-head of MI5, has already said that there's some kind of understanding that MI5 will help Scotland with that. So we're going to need all of these things, and the biggest threat to us, we don't have a huge military threat. The only people who've invaded Scotland in the last 1,000 years are really the English.
And
so
the French.
There's not that much of a threat. I mean, military threat really, but the threat comes from terrorism, and we didn't suffer in so much in the IRA bombings as England did. But we need to put those surveillance departments in place, and a lot of it is online, a lot of cybercrime coming particularly from China. And we have a really corking technology industry in Scotland, a huge games industry. We have that talent here, we just need to direct it differently, and it's going to bring a whole load of jobs to Scotland, setting up these new departments.
Thanks, Sara. And then there was part of your question was also about university further education funding. If only we had a professor, a retired professor.
Well, this is a very interesting one because I can show my dispassionate credentials on this. First of all, let's be clear about it. Scottish universities, in terms of competitive research funding, far outdo our population share, very considerably. And both competitive funding in the EU and further afield. The proposals in the white paper for maintaining UK-wide research networks are entirely reasonable and are quite likely that they will, in whole or in part, be carried on, because in the end of the day, research funding will go to where there is good research. It's not. It doesn't pick and choose on the count of flags. However, there is one area of university funding which does raise a problem for independent Scotland, given that we have a policy of not having tuition fees, and English students would then be other EU students and would therefore, under the normal application of rules, be entitled to free places on the same basis as Scottish students. Now, there are three possible answers to this. It's a bit detailed, but let me try to be brief. One is to say that Scotland would negotiate an exception with the EU, and there are precedents for this. It is remotely possible that that might be negotiated. If you press me, I would think that is probably the least likely of the three solutions. Another solution is the Bavarian solution. Bavaria has a regime in which they get round this by having fees, but people who have full Bavarian residence get a grant which wipes the fee out. And so if we introduced a scheme like that, Scottish students would be getting free education, and some English students, depending upon how long families had lived north of the border, would also get that, but not all would. So that's another possibility, and that's entirely within the EU's rules. There might be political reasons why a Scottish government might not want to do that. The third possibility, quite frankly, is that the Scottish government would simply find the money that was needed to accept the penalty of loss of current English students' fees. And in terms of total sum of money, it's not that great, and quite frankly, that is, I think, the option that the Scottish government would follow. So there is an area of technical difficulty there, but technical difficulties are made to be solved. It's what governments do, or should do.
Okay. Am I allowed to ask a question?
Yes, you can, yeah.
Would it be possible to use the exam system as a gate, i.e. make it the requirements for if you be A-levels to be higher than the requirements if you get highest, which would also give a boost to the school? We could actually be then in a position where we're exporting our exam system as a revenue earner.
That's why he's a businessman. Never occurred to me. You're disgraceful.
Is that on video? Can we hear it?
It sort of takes me back to the situation when I was looking at university places way back, sort of start of the 60s. I went up in 62. I should have gone up in 61, but I lost a year at school through illness. And in those days, the difference in the exam system's acceptability meant that it was extremely difficult to go from a Scottish school to an English university.
Exactly.
And at that stage, it's all BBC Two's fault. They had a programme about the lives of three professionals. And I saw this programme about the life of a rural English solicitor, and I thought, gosh, that looks rather nice. You get a Rover car to drive around in, and nice village pubs. So I rather fancy going to England and doing English law, which, turns out to be, couldn't be further from the path that I followed. But I stubbed my toe against this difficulty. I would think, actually, that politically that's something that they would want to take on.
Okay.
Further persuasion required.
Any other questions? Yes. The first one was so successfully answered shortly.
That was wasn't even a question. It was so short answered. So I'm just curious. So the UK with it's got a massive debt. 1.6 trillion.
1.4.
1.4.
It's got to be 1.6 by
Tuesday.
So it's so big, and so much money is spent in just servicing the debts. When Scotland gets independence and we take away the asset of the oil, what will happen to the rest of the UK when we've no longer got that coming in to boost the...
That's a good question. The broader question is what happens to the rest of the UK, and the reality is that people say it'll sink like a stone and it'll fall to bits and stuff. The reality is Scotland needs a strong rest of the UK as a trading partner, just as they need a strong Scotland as a trading partner. So it's in everybody's interest to make this work. in a sensible way, very few barriers to keep the economy ticking along. The oil to them, of course, is only, well, it's 15% of our economy, it's only 1 and a bit % of their economy. So it's useful for them as someone to go and get a few extra billion when you need it, but in the scheme of things, it's not the end of the world for them. Their economy will take a wee bit of a economy. You already saw some stuff. I mean, it wasn't significant yesterday. The pound took it a knock of 1% or something based on that poll. You'll see a wee bit of adjustment going on as folk factor this stuff in, but it's not going to be significant in the scheme of things as far as they're concerned, because they're more able to absorb because their economy is bigger.
I just thought this talking about having $1 trillion worth in oil assets in the West Coast, and obviously the debt's about $1 trillion. You know, and I just was seeing a bit of...
Well, $1 trillion is a wholesale, and it's over decades. So it's yeah.
It's not an immediate thing you can transfer. I mean, what's lying behind your answer, I think, Ivan, is that this is exactly why there will be a currency union of some kind. Probably they will invent a new name for it, so to save faces. But you know, the alternative of there being a currency union, that would be really very, very bad for the rest of the UK. And as Ivan said, that would be bad for us, which is why it has been entirely sensible all along to say that, you know, going for a currency union is in the interests of all parties.
There's a whole load of interesting ideas knocking about as well. Robin McAlpine from the Commonweal talks about, should we set up a development fund for the north of England? And should we give loans to the north of England? Because he feels, oh, thank you very much, he feels that, you know, he feels like he's abandoning his socialist brothers, I think. And there is that feeling about, you know, what about Manchester, Liverpool and all of that? So I think there is an argument there that we could do something along the lines if we had the money to set up a development fund, business development fund for the north of England and give out grants.
Okay.
It's not anyone's policy, it's just Robin's idea. But it's a good idea.
Any other questions? No, it is 9:10, I suppose. It was a later start. Okay, our panel won't rush off immediately, so if anyone does have any questions, I'm sure you can nobble them on a one-to-one basis afterwards. But can I just ask you to put your hands together and thank our panel for this evening. Just before you go, if anyone does still have remaining questions or knows somebody out there that's still undecided, yes, Tweeddale will be on Peebles High Street at least on the Saturdays, and you'll see us more and more. We have a Facebook page, Yes Tweeddale. We have a Yes Scottish Borders Facebook page. We have an email account, Yes Tweeddale or yesscottishborders@gmail.com. Please reach out to us if you want information, if you want a window poster, if you have questions, please do not leave them unasked. Somebody said the other day to me about the importance of walking into that polling booth feeling informed. You're going to be asked how you voted on the 18th of September for the rest of your life. People are going to ask you how you voted and why. And there are lots of answers to that question. All I would ask you think about is my answer to that question something I'm willing to say out loud and I think will stand the test of time? Thanks for coming tonight.
Callum, can I just say there are some fantastic articles on the Business for Scotland website.
You certainly
can. A lot of questions as well.
And we have some wee blue books as well, which are fantastic. And we also gladly receive donations to help pay for Sundays. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining.